Today we get a whole lot of parts cleaned up and fitted to the frame, and we get the engine running by the end of the day. There's the engine back fitted and bolted in properly. I've got a fuel tank sitting up there, which is where I went wrong. I've also strung some of the wiring loom around. I haven't actually bolted the fuel tank in, it's just hanging on a cable tie there, because the loom, wiring loom, and a number of cables run through here. You've got a handbrake cable, a choke cable, a throttle cable, the main loom. You've got positive and negative going to the starter motor. They've all got to come through that side of the fuel tank, and then up the other side of the fuel tank, the petrol line from the petrol pump comes across, a couple of breather pipes. This line here comes around the top of the fuel tank there, and that's going to the stator and the illumination light for the odometer. I haven't really organised the cables as they come out the front here. One interesting thing when you're laying the cables out, they go on the outside of the bracket there. That's where the CDI unit bolts on, and rather than the cable go, it actually comes around this side of that bracket on this side, which seems a little odd, but that's what it does. When you look down through there, you perhaps see the reason that's the case. So the other cables run over the top here. Choke, brake and throttle cable all run down under there as well. The front of the loom is just hanging out in the breeze here at the moment. I think they can all be organised. That's the starter relay on the positive, and this one's the negative. There's a few more parts to go up on the handlebars, but that's headlight switch and run and stop switch, which I've put on because it's also got the choke cable attached to it, and I wanted to run it. The space over the top of the petrol tank reduces dramatically once you put the rubber mat on there and then start bolting the gear shift stuff in. So I wanted to get all of that organised, everything that had to run over the top of the fuel tank organised before I bolted it up. I've got the motor in. It's not that far away from me having it able to run again, which I'll aim to do. I think I'm going to put the CDI box on. There's a thread here that needs tapping out. The other bolt went in okay. Coil bolts on here and forms part of the nut for the fuel tank mount there. The voltage regulator bolts on with these screws. We're just working my way around, putting bits and pieces onto the chassis. Some things, like the rear parking brake lever, was all gummed up because it hadn't been cleaned or anything yet, and it had to go on before the run stop switch. It's on there, and it had also had to run across the top of the fuel tank. So there's two things that I had obviously played with the run stop switch on the loom, but I hadn't played with the parking brake. I've rigged up a temporary battery on a little battery box that I've screwed to the chassis there, and a cable tie to hold it on. They're the three fuses that come out through the plastic when the plastic's on there. That's the neutral or the negative wire. This big one goes just to the chassis. The positive has a little bullet connector there that connects into the main loom, bringing positive through to the rest of the circuit. Starter solenoid, neutral relay. There, it's the ignition on. I've rigged up the horn. voltage regulator. That's the new connector there that I've put on it. This is unterminated, that would run up to the headlight. I think everything I've got connected at the moment is working. There's a spare connector here for the thematic fan switch, which needs to be mounted up on the handlebar. That ignition is on at the moment. If I put the run switch to run, that's the starter motor popping. Haven't got the spark plug connected. Now I do. I haven't got fuel and carburetors on it yet, so perhaps the next thing I want to work on is the gear change cable, reversing switch, and the 5-speed connection there, and then the high and low range over there. All of those need to be in place, I think, before the airbox and carburetor go on. Yeah, pretty happy with all the electrics. Seem to be working so far. Not far from the motor running. I think if I had to put the carburetor on at the moment, it would start and run. I'm going to clean up these shifter cables next. This one is for the sub-transmission. Got to knock that clip off this end of the bracket to release the bracket, and I'll then go over to the wire wheel. Buzz as much of that as I can with the wire wheel. The other end, the rubber seems to be in pretty good nick. It's the lock nuts there. I'll buzz those again. So same again with the other end. This is the reverse and the 5-speed sequential box. That one there drops down to the pedal. The other one goes up to the reverse lever. Same thing, there's a clip on the back there and they release. I'm going to, the actual gear, 5-speed gearbox has got a longer lever on that end. You can see the reverse one's a shorter one. You can tell by the bigger bolt going through the longer lever to give it more leverage. They'll all clean up quite well, I believe. Now here's an example of how well that bracket has cleaned up on the 8-inch wire wheel. You can't get inside it there. I'm going to use the little brush on the die grinder to try and get to a bit more of that internally, but the external surfaces have buffed back up to original plating. When it's all done like that, all of these, the things will start to look brand new. That's the end of these cables with a bit of a wire brush. That works quite freely. Just got to be careful with the brush that you don't get into the rubber. Plating is underneath all this rust, and it's quite satisfying seeing it come up with not a lot of effort. That's the reverse cable. It still works quite freely. Mount it back to the bracket. Okay, that's that linkage. This is the sub-transmission linkage. Bracket's cleaned up, circlips on. This end of the cable looks good. That cable goes up. It's got to go across, right across the other side there. It's the first lever. It goes in the first slot over that side on this bulkhead. I'll worry about that when I get the others. I'll put that on first. It's probably a little bit in front of the mounting points for the other bracket. You can get through here with a screwdriver to these other points. That's the point where in a previous video I removed the sheared off bolt from there. But it just goes to show how this Chook shed find, a bit of wire wheel, the cables are actually in good operating condition, no holes in the rubbers. They look good. That's the reverse lever. I don't think it's clicking into gear. What I haven't got is an indication as to where that spline fits I've just guessed at the moment. As you can sort of get a bit of a memory from the rubber and the cable itself. That's the top end of that cable I'm working just with my fingers. This is the sub-transmission. I think that's clicking into gear properly, and I'm fairly happy with the movement of the rubber on that one. It's free enough for me to operate with my hand like that, so not needing a lever. This one I'm pretty sure is not going into reverse. Figure that's forward and it's not going into reverse, which is further back, and I'm not sure whether that lever's on the right spline. Yeah, the bracket cleaned up pretty nice in both cases. The sequential 5-speed one is not on there at the moment. That cable was quite stiff internally, and one of the bellows up end where it goes down to the pedal, this aluminium clip had come loose. Anyway, that meant I could get inside there and put some lubricant up inside the cable. Brake lever, I've now got it hanging up over there. I dripped some oil down it. It was this end that was open, so rather than just fit it to the bike with this being the low point, I thought I'd hang it upside down, or this end being the high, make it the high point, and if any oil was getting inside it, it would run down towards the other end. I'll grab it now and fit it and see what it feels like. That's the 5-speed sequential lever, shift lever hooked in. It runs across and down towards the pedal there. It doesn't move much because you've got the force of the big spring in the clutch cover preventing much movement on that. You really need the leverage of the pedal to get it to click. I don't know whether I've got that lever on in the right orientation. It's sort of back to front compared to the others, where the circlip's on the outside here and the reverse one is also on the outside there. This one, the circlip's on the inside, towards the inside, and the bolt is towards the front here, whereas the bolt's towards the back on the others. Now that may well be the correct orientation. It looks like it's probably the right spline I've connected there, because the lever, which has a sort of central position and it moves forward or it moves back on a shift, is actually nicely at right angles to the pull of that cable. So it sort of looks right, but I might have to check with the book. I don't have a reference on the end of the shaft there as to where this slot should line up. I don't have that on any of them at the moment, so I've guessed at that. I've got these in place so that I can move towards refitting the carburetor. I've got the choke and the throttle cables there. Got room now to fit the airbox and the carburetor. I wanted to get the engine started just with the basics. Putting the exhaust on required a bit of reworking. You see the pipe running through here. I couldn't get that on with the frame member in place, or this gear mechanism in place, or even the that's the gear, the foot gear shift in place. All had to come out in order to put the exhaust in. The exhaust splits here. That joint I've not had apart, and I took the exhaust off in one piece when I was dismantling this engine, and this piece was out, everything was out. It would have been difficult to fit some of those other things in behind there with the exhaust in place, or putting the exhaust on before putting that cross member in. Doing it at this point isn't too bad. It didn't take long to remove some of those items, and it won't take long to put them back on again. But I've now got the exhaust screwed on tight. We're not far from being able to start the thing, so I'll put these bits back on top it up with a bit of fuel and see whether it'll run. Okay, I've got those bits back on. I've put that cross member back in. I've put this sub-transmission gear shift back on, hooked up the sequential gearbox 5-speed shift, reconnected the stator. I think I am ready to give it a start. I'm going to top up this little funnel. You see the fuel running into that fuel filter there. Not quickly, but my Suzuki bottle. Don't want to drip too much. I don't need a lot of fuel, but it gets a bit of an airlock still. There's fuel in the funnel there that needs to bubble down, which it just did. A little bit of fuel in my little fuel tank there. It is obviously not running through to the... There's enough in the system there for a start. I'm going to turn the ignition on, which I've got a green light up there. I'm going to put the choke on, run stop switch on, and see what happens when I press the start button. This is live. Well, it still runs. That literally was the first time I've tried to start it while it's in the motor, while it's in the frame. Everything's back to working. Wiring loom and everything's all plugged in properly, and all of the electrics is working. I've even got a horn. Yeah, that sort of horn. got the garage doors open, so a bit of this smoke or fumes is able to escape. I can push on with it now. I've got a fuel leak somewhere. I'll put that bucket under there to catch it. But I think we're dripping off the bottom of the carburetor somewhere. Hard to see in around there. I could see it better from this other side. But, it may well have already. Here it is. That's a minor problem really. For some reason it's not leaking nearly as badly as it was. So I'll stop there. That's reverse. That was forward. So the reverse and forward is working. The sub-transmission is working. That rear axle's turning, but it's sort of just being pulled around by a bit of oil friction, basically. So that's why I was able to stop it with my hand. It's not in gear as such, but if you put it in reverse, the oil friction pulls it around in reverse, and if you put it in low range, it moves slower, so the oil friction is pulling it around in low range. So the shift levers here for the reverse and low range are both working fine, and I can test that without it actually being in gear. And the clutch is engaged. It's the centrifugal clutch is just slipping, but even the main gearbox is in neutral, so there's nothing pulling it around except a bit of friction in the oil. One of my next jobs is to clean and paint this footrest. Had it out in the sun today, trying to knock a bit of the dirt off it. Looks to be in reasonable nick. The pivot point for the gear change here is rusted and haven't found a gear. I need to go and drag out the gear lever. A bolt probably seized in there and one on the other side. I think I'll attack that with a wire wheel in the angle grinder and see how much shit I can knock off that. They're a complex bit of kit which takes a lot of pissing around to clean, but we'll get there. So that's the job for tomorrow. It's been a fun day. Get out to your shed and have some fun yourself.